I'm Donna Amaral Phillips, Extension Dairy Specialist at the University of Kentucky. I'd like to go ahead and welcome today's webinar, Can I Really Prevent My Cows from Becoming Lame, by Dr. Ernest Hoving. Ernest earned his veterinary degree from the Ontario Veterinary College at the University of Guelph. He was in a mixed animal practice for a few years before going to the Prince Edward Island to earn his master's degree at the Atlanta Veterinary College there, and also complete a food animal clinical residency. He spent several years teaching and doing extension work at Virginia Maryland Regional College of Veterinarians. Since 2004, he has been a field investigator, dairy extension veterinarian, and researcher in the Department of Veterinary and Biomedical Sciences at Penn State.
All right, thanks a lot, Donna. This is the second webinar that I've done on lameness, and we'll be expanding on some of the topics that we covered the last time. I'm just wondering if there we go. All right. So this is, I'm just going to review a couple of things at the beginning here that we talked about the last time. If you want to look at the discussion from the last time, you can go and look in the archives and see what we covered then. But briefly, what we had talked about was this approach to dealing with lameness, of looking at really a three-tiered approach to that: preventing lame cows, identifying lame cows, because even if we work on preventing it, we're going to end up with a few lame cows, and then managing or treating those lame cows appropriately so that they don't end up becoming a welfare concern or an economic concern on the farm. But then today what we're really going to be focusing on is this idea of preventing lame cows, and that's really our focus for today. So the last webinar I talked about this idea that there's things that happen inside the foot that can cause or affect foot health, and that can be positively or negatively. We're not going to review all of those, but they're there, and if you want more details, you can go back and look at the archives. But one of the things that we talked about was that the external factors are also very important. Things that happen outside that foot impact what happens inside that foot. And so we're going to focus more on those today. So you can also think of this as, if you will, physiological reasons for lameness or poor hoof health. So what is it in the production of hoof tissue that can cause problems or be part of that whole lameness scenario we might see? And then we also have these mechanical forces or mechanical factors that are part of this, and there's various pressures and stresses that are on the foot and on the corium, and that affects whether or not an animal becomes lame. So it's a pretty complicated picture. Lameness is usually not a very easy thing to solve, if you will, and there's a lot of things that interact with each other. It's very seldom that we can go to a herd and identify one single thing that is the sole cause of all lameness in that herd. And it's usually a number of these different pieces of this puzzle that are important. And so we really need to look at those and try and figure out which ones are most important on a specific farm. So we see that it varies from cow to cow, though. Even within a farm, we'll have some cows are affected by different factors than other cows. So not every cow on the farm is affected in the same way by these different things that we're talking about. Within a farm, it can vary from season to season what the most important factor or most important piece of the puzzle is. And so again, we need to try and figure out what at the current time is the most important thing. Is that the same as what it is during the spring or during the summer, and how do we address those issues? It varies from farm to farm. So what's a problem in one farm might not be a problem in another farm down the road, even though they're very close by and are managed fairly similarly. And then we do have quite a bit of regional variation as well. And so what happens on the East Coast might not be the same as the West Coast, and the North versus the South, and so on. So there's a lot of different things that come into play that we have to consider. And so when I talk about these different things that we need to look at, that might not be exactly true for the same in every single herd, and you'll have to try and figure out which one it is that's most important in your herd. So here we have a picture of a claw capsule and the P3 bone which sits in that claw capsule. I showed this the last time as well, and really the important part here for the discussion today is that we have a very important tissue that sits between these two structures, between this P3 bone and the claw capsule, and that tissue is the corium. And what you're seeing here, this very red tissue, that's the corium, and that's the tissue that produces what you see on the outside of that foot. So it makes the sole, it makes the white line, it makes the hoof wall, it makes the coronary band and the heel, and that corium is very important to the proper functioning of that hoof and the proper production of claw capsule tissues. So we need to protect that corium as much as we can. If we end up with unhealthy or damaged corium, we end up with poor quality or defective claw tissue. So then we end up with heels or soles that are more susceptible to mechanical damage, more susceptible to infection, etc. So, all right, just to show you a couple of pictures, again, just on the inside of the foot, although we're going to be focusing for the rest of the seminar or webinar on the outside of the foot. This is a section through a claw. You can see the P3 bone outlined right here. This is the bottom of the P3 bone here, coming back to the back corner of the P3 bone. This is the sole of the foot. This is the heel back here. And then, excuse me, and then we have the corium, which is outlined right here, which produces that sole tissue. Now you can see in this part of the corium, there's some obvious problems. It's not consistent with the rest of it. And what we have here is actually a bruise or a hematoma or damage in the corium. And so this corium is not going to be able to produce normal sole tissue for a period of a number of days or maybe even a week or two. The problem with that is that we then end up with defective sole tissue, and ultimately that might look like this. This is a different foot. Again, the same type of cross-section, so we've got the P3, bottom of P3 coming right here. This is where the corium is, this line of tissue right here. This is all the sole tissue. You can see that there's a number of layers in this sole that are abnormal, okay? And so again, a very obvious defect in the sole right here. And you can see in this spot right here, we've had multiple defects, and now we've actually got a full defect all the way through that sole, so that we have a sole ulcer. We have that corium exposed to the outside world. And this, again, is a very painful condition, and hopefully one that we can try and prevent with some of these things that we'll talk about. All right, so the damage to the corium then comes about because of a number of internal factors, but also external factors such as pressure. You might actually see bruising, you might not, but we're decreasing the blood flow to the corium and thereby compromising its ability to do the job that it needs to do. And so we're going to look at some of these factors such as trimming, housing, nutrition, heat stress, and so on. All right, so these are the external factors that we're going to look at. We're going to focus primarily on the first three. We'll touch on the other ones a little bit as well, but we don't have time to cover all of them in detail. Again, as I said earlier, it's going to vary from farm to farm, maybe even from season to season within a farm, which of these factors are the most important. But we need to consider all of them and see which ones we can address and try and reduce the level of lameness and improve hoof health on any specific farm. All right, so cow comfort, it's important because what we really need to do is try and reduce the amount of standing time, because when that cow is standing, and especially standing for prolonged periods of time, like this cow down here, you can see that she's putting a lot of weight on those feet. We'll talk a little bit more later about actually what type of pressure we have on those feet and on the corium. But then we end up with a situation where we don't have adequate blood flow through that corium, and we're going to compromise its ability to produce good quality tissue. So that's why cow comfort is important, and why we need to try and get those cows off their feet and able to lie down. So when we look at cow comfort, we can really look at a couple of different aspects of this. One is, do the cows actually have access to the stalls? And secondly, if they can get to the stall, is the stall designed in a way that the cow can get into it, and then is it comfortable enough that she wants to lay down in it? So we're going to look at a number of these factors here in the next few slides. So the access to the stalls, well, overcrowding is certainly one thing that we see in quite a lot of herds where we're stocking at more than one cow per stall. You can see in this herd here, this is a Pennsylvania herd, these 4 cows are waiting for their turn in bed, and while they're doing that, you can see again they're standing here for prolonged periods of time. They're putting a lot of weight on those feet, and especially they're transferring some extra weight to their back feet, which are more susceptible then to claw lesions and to developing lameness. So in this situation, it was actually it was overcrowded. It was also an issue with some heat stress because we had poor stall usage on the outside wall here of this facility, but there was definitely also an overcrowding issue. So we can see that it reduces resting time. We look at some of the research, and there's a number of different studies out there. This is one that shows when these cows were stocked at 100% density, 1 cow per stall. They were basically almost at 13 hours per day of lying time right here. And then they started blocking off different stalls to increase the stocking density. And you can see there's pretty much a linear decrease in the hours per day that those cows are able to lie in the stall when you increase the stocking density. And conversely then, standing in the alleys, which is what they spend the rest of their time doing, goes up. So that's not surprising, but that again is going to put more pressure on the corium and thereby potentially compromise the quality of the tissue that corium is able to produce. Well, so certainly we reduce resting time, but it also reduces feed availability or feeding space availability. We won't really touch on that today, but it can affect feeding behavior. We might get into some more slug feeding, potential for sorting, and so on. So the question then becomes, what stocking density should I be at? Most people are stocked at a little bit more than 100%. In Canada, the Code of Dairy Practice, they've actually suggested that it should be no more than 1.2 or 120%, 1.2 cows per stall as a maximum. We could argue probably even a little bit less than that is the point where for a lot of herds, should be. In the European Union, they've actually gone to where they're requiring more stalls than cows. And so the number that I heard was 10% more stalls than cows, which might be a little bit excessive, but that's what they're requiring there. So that becomes an economic concern then, in that we have more stalls than we really need for the number of cows that we have. All right, well, the other thing that we can't forget, those are the lactating cows, is that we also need to look at stocking density on our dry cows and transition cows. This is probably even more critical than our lactating cows. And we really should stay under 100%, probably in the 90%, maybe even a little bit lower than that. Part of the issue here is that we normally have quite a few pen moves going on. We have more social adjustments with cows moving in and out of these different pens and groups. And so it becomes really critical that these cows are able to lie down in a comfortable stall and that they're not spending more time on their feet than they need to. So that's something that really needs to be considered, and that's one area where we do need to spend a bit of time trying to investigate potential cow comfort problems and access to stalls for these dry cows. Just a quick little thing to show you some of these numbers. This is a little project that we did for a pilot project for another study we're doing right now. I'm looking at cow lying behavior in the dry period. And what we did was we took these hobo data loggers and we put them on the legs of the cow so we could tell whether that cow was lying down or standing up. And when you look at these cows just through the dry period for 2 different cows, you'll see that this cow 1646, the Penn State cow, when she initially dried off here, she was at somewhere around 14 hours per day lying time. But then after about 2 weeks or so, a week and a half to 2 weeks, she dropped down to this level here, and was somewhere in this 10 hours per day lying time for most of the dry period. Certainly some variability there. But you can see in the last 10 days before she dried off, or before she calved, she averaged about 9.5 hours per day of lying time. One of her herd mates, this cow here, 1448, you can see she maintained a higher lying time pretty much throughout the dry period. In the last 10 days before she calved, she was up at 15 hours per day. So we're interested in knowing then, are these patterns of lying time or lying behavior important in predicting what happens to that cow in that next lactation? Just to show you, we don't have enough data to be able to generate lots of numbers, but here's just one of the things that we can look at. For example, if we look at the calving ease on these cows, so a cow that was calved unassisted, we look at her total lying time was 12 hours, 12.3 hours in the 10 days before calving, 12.3 hours per day. Cows that required a medium pull, they were down at the 11 hours per day lying time in the pre-calving period. Again, we don't know if this is going to hold true over a larger number of cows. This is a pretty small sample size at this point. But this is the kind of stuff that we're going to be looking at, and looking at the importance of lying time in the dry period. All right, well, stocking density is certainly one thing. Even if we're stocking at an appropriate density, we might still be forcing these cows to stay away from the stalls because of things that we're doing in terms of holding pen management, in terms of palpation rail or headlock management, and we might not be able to give these cows access to the stalls because they're just not able to get to them. So we need to look at the amount of time that these cows spend in the holding pen, the time that we're locking them up so that they, again, cannot get away from the headlocks and lying down in the stalls. If you look at this, we really need to look at the maximum amount of time that any single cow spends in the holding pen. We shouldn't look at averages here, probably. A little study that was done looking at some numbers here by Cook and Nordland, looking at 14 different cows, and they looked at them over a number of months and did some recordings of them. And not surprisingly, you'll see that some of these cows very consistently are at the back of the holding pen, if you will, and end up spending a long time in the holding pen, whereas other ones pretty consistently get out very quickly. So again, we need to look at the maximum amount of time because in this case, averages are going to fool us a little bit, and it's really these cows here that are up at the high end that we're concerned about. All right, well, one of the things we can consider if we're going to force animals to stand for a period of time, whether it's in a holding pen or whether it's in palpation rail or in headlocks, maybe there's something we can do to try and reduce the impact of that standing time. And this is a little study that they were doing over in Europe, and looking at flooring here, and you'll see again that there's some rubber flooring down or resilient flooring down here, halfway down this holding pen, and it's pretty obvious which the cows prefer. I'm not sure if we can say it's economically justified to do this, but certainly the cows do prefer to stand on this resilient flooring rather than on the uncovered concrete floor. This was a herd in Virginia that I visited, and you can see this is a holding pen. We're standing in the parlor here looking down the holding pen. And this is a crowd gate, and you'll see the cows are standing here on the last little bit of the holding pen. Even though it's not milking time, they think it feels pretty comfortable to them, and so again, they're demonstrating a behavior or a preference for resilient flooring. All right, well, assuming we can get the cows to the stalls, how are we going to get that cow to lie down in the stall, get up and get out and do all of that easily so that she wants to lie down, she can get up easily, go and get something to eat and drink, and then lie down again. That's pretty important. This cow here is one of our Pennsylvania herds, and she's having a nice sleep. I was a little bit concerned she might actually be dead, but it turns out she was just comfortably asleep and completely oblivious to the world around her. That's what we're hoping we can achieve. Here's 3 different herds demonstrating different levels of cow comfort. One of the things that we can do to get an idea, it's certainly not a perfect number, but we can go in and count the number of cows that are in the stalls, okay, whether they're lying down, partially standing in the stall, and then what we can do is take an average or calculate a percentage of the cows that are standing in the stall, either partway or completely in the stall, and divide that by the total number of cows that are in the stall. And the goal is that we should have probably 90% or more in a high cow comfort facility, which is what we're achieving in this herd right here, in order to say that we have a pretty good level of cow comfort. These other two facilities on the left, you'll see that there's a lot of cows that are standing either completely in the stall or standing partway in the stall. In this case, this herd, there were a lot of cows standing half in, half out of the stall. And if you look at the research there, it suggests that if that number goes higher than 20%, we've probably got more than 75, let me rephrase that. If that number is less than 75%, we've probably got more than 20% lame in that pen. So again, a pretty strong link there between cow comfort and lameness within the herd or within the pen. So we need to figure out why this cow does or does not want to get in and lie down in these different stalls. Well, part of that certainly can be the dimensions of the stalls, and that's important to figure out. We can take a measuring tape and we can do lots of measurements, but my contention is that a lot of time we don't need a measuring tape. We can look at the cows, we can look at the stalls, and we can learn a lot from that. This was another Pennsylvania herd, and this was actually the fresh cow facility, the fresh cow pen. Not something that I expect has very high cow comfort. The cows were currently out at the milking parlor, but again, very poor stall usage in this facility. This is another look at another row of stalls in that same pen. This is a herd, another picture from a herd I showed earlier. Again, we see lots of cows. Some of them are willing to get in the stall this far. They can get all 4 feet on the platform. Some of them are not even able to fit in that far. Some of them that are getting in are kind of falling out of their beds here. And so we need to try and figure out why it is these cows can't get all the way up in the stalls or can't lie down in the stalls. And again, we can start measuring things, or we can just start looking at things here. If we look into one of these stalls, and this is in the same herd as the previous picture, you'll notice a couple of different things here. First of all, the bed is very hollowed out, so there's not a lot of bedding there. It's really compressed, and there's nothing on top of the mattress here. You'll also see that there's significant obstructions in the front of this stall, so it's difficult for that cow to have anywhere to put her head as she's lunging or bobbing to lie down. And similarly to the side, there's not very good access for her to lunge to the side to lie down. So it's difficult for her to get into the stall because it's fairly short. It's difficult for her to lie down because, again, there's obstructions in the front and to the side of this stall. All right, you can also look at, this is a cow, this is a video of a cow getting out of a stall. Again, the same type of obstructions are going to be problematic whether she's lying down in the stall or getting up in the stall. And as you can see with this one, once we get it playing here, so you can see as this cow goes to get up, she's going to lunge forward. She can't make it because there's something that's causing her not to be able to transfer that weight to the front of her body and get those feet up behind her. It certainly isn't terrible, but it's enough that it's going to discourage her potentially from getting up or getting down in additional time. So maybe what we can do is just have a really quick look here, if I can rewind this thing. And what you'll notice is when this cow goes to get up, if you watch right here, she isn't able to get her head forward all the way and isn't able to get her weight transferred to her front legs adequately enough to get her hind end up. You'll also notice here as she gets up that her neck makes contact with the neck rail, and you can't see it really well there, but she does end up bumping her neck on the neck rail fairly hard. So we could probably make some adjustments to these stalls fairly easily to try and improve cow comfort a little bit. All right. Okay, a couple of other things quickly here. We need to make sure if that cow can get up in that stall that she has a comfortable resting surface to lie down on. So we need to look at bedding, the surface that she's lying down on. This is a herd that is investigating for some lameness and other problems. You'll notice a couple of different things. The bedding is definitely below the curb by a fair bit. That also makes the brisket board seem very high here, which it is. You'll also notice that the stalls are pretty wet. That's another deterrent to stall usage in cattle. And one of their studies, there's been a number of them looking at bedding, suggests that you really need to have adequate amount of bedding in those stalls in order to have good cow comfort. And this specific study suggested almost a half-hour less lying time for every inch below the level of the curb that your bedding was. So again, there's a number of studies that have shown similar results, that we really need to get enough bedding on top of those stalls. So you can do that by designing your stall from the get-go. If you want to put a mattress in there to take the place of some bedding, putting a few inches of bedding on top of that and designing the curb to hold all of that, so you don't have your mattress level with the stall surface, or the curb, the edge of the curb. There's other things you can do if you want to retrofit a facility. You can put a bedding retainer in here. This is a PVC pipe in a facility which allows 4 to 6 inches of sawdust to be added. Again, very good cow comfort in this facility. If you don't want to do that, or if you don't think that that's practical for your facility, you can just go ahead and add lots of bedding and just bed more frequently. And this is a herd in Pennsylvania that uses composted manure solids, and again, beds frequently with quite a bit of material because they have a lot of it available, and again, are able to maintain good cow comfort by doing that. All right, well, another herd that was an interesting investigation to go on. I was called by the hoof trimmer and the herd owner and veterinarian because of some unusual findings during trimming and some lameness problems in this facility. If you look at this cow laying in this stall in this herd, you'll notice that these cows, when they lie, especially in the wide position, they're going to move that foot underneath them, and they can have a fair bit of weight on that foot as they move it back and forth. And so what we're going to do is look and see what happens at this interface right here. And you'll notice that here's the stall surface, and she's pulling that foot as she lies down or as she gets up. She's going to be dragging that foot along the stall surface. And obviously we have some bedding on here, but you can see the stall base right here. So if we look at that, here's again another cow in the same herd. You can see the drag marks here from that foot all the way here. She's pulled it back underneath herself. You can see she's dragging her toes on the stall surface right here. You can start to see a little bit of the stall surface right there, or the base of the stall. And here's what it looks like. You can see there's not a whole lot of bedding on there. There's a little bit more up towards the brisket board. I kicked this away with my foot, but you can see there's only a couple of inches, an inch to 2 right here. There's a little bit more up at the front of the stall. But when you look at this surface here more closely, what you see is that we have a very rough surface. It's an asphalt surface. There's aggregate sticking out of here, and it's a very abrasive surface. And then we have a fairly coarse sand on top of there. And really this acts like sandpaper on these cows' feet. And this is what we saw at hoof trimming time. This is just to orient yourself. This is the toe over here, the heel. This is the outside claw, and this is the space between the two claws, and then this is the hoof wall over here. Just look at that in a little bit, enlarge that a little bit. See, this is what it looks like, and this is where the white line is. Here's the approximate location of the white line, and then this is the edge of the hoof wall. So if I had an opportunity to ask you, I would do a little quiz here and ask you if you knew what this structure is right here, or what you're seeing right here. But what you're actually seeing there is the lamina. So this hoof wall is completely worn away. All this area is worn away because of that foot rubbing against the stall surface with that coarse sand between it and the stall surface. And this is not the same cow. Obviously, we don't cut toes off of cows. This is a cow from the slaughterhouse. And effectively what is happening in this herd, though, is that we're losing this hoof wall because of that abrasive nature, and we're basically wearing it away so that we see this effect. And that lamina is being exposed right there. So very painful for those cows. They're definitely lame, also much more susceptible to white line infections and other problems on the bottom of the feet because of excess weight now on the soles of those feet rather than on the having hoof wall bearing weight as well. Well, in this herd, we also saw problems with other injuries to the feet. You can see here we have some injury because of stones and so on between the stall bed, the stall surface, and the sand. And you can see again some more on this foot over here. So again, cow comfort is a very important factor. I think we really need to get those cows off their feet. We need to get them lying down in a comfortable stall, and we need to make sure that the cows can access stalls when they want to so that they're able to lie down. All right, well, another thing that I think we sometimes don't think about often enough or pay enough attention to is animal handling and movement. The problem here is that that foot is going to interact with that floor, and we have to try and make sure that we don't cause any excessive mechanical stress or trauma to that foot. And you'll see some of that as we go through this, but we can get increased wear on that foot. We can get damage to the weight-bearing areas of those feet. So again, interaction between the foot and the floor is pretty complicated. There's a lot of things involved. Certainly the weight of the cow is very important. Larger cows are going to have, even per square inch, are going to have more weight on that corium. The compressibility or hardness of the floor is important, and of the foot. The texture of the floor is important. Other materials that come between the floor and the claw are important, and then the shape and conformation of the foot, as well as the motion of that cow. So we're going to talk about these, not all specifically in this order, but these are all things we need to think about because they're extremely important to the health and condition of that foot. So if we have this cow, and obviously she's putting weight on her foot, we can talk about the hardness, of the flooring. And obviously concrete is a very good thing because it's very durable, but it also makes it very resistant to any indentation or deformation. Right? It's very hard, so that's good for the facility lasting for a long time, but unfortunately it's not very good for cow comfort as such. The hardness of the cow's foot is also important. We need to make sure that's as hard as we can make it, reasonably make it, so that it is also resistant to friction and abrasion. Well, we can modify the hardness of the floor by putting in resilient flooring. So this is a product that will allow some deformation. It reduces the amount of friction as well, and it does so pretty effectively. The question is it something that we need to put in every herd and every square inch of the floor? Well, probably not, but in some situations it is a valuable way to try and reduce the hardness of that floor and potentially keep the feet healthier. Again, we might want to use that in certain areas of the farm as a management tool. All right, just to show you some numbers here, if you try and calculate out the approximate weight-bearing area of the foot and the weight of the cow, it's a little bit tricky to calculate exactly how many square inches per foot you have, but there's been a couple of studies looking at this. We've played around with this a little bit. If we assume that we have fairly significant amount of contact between the sole of the foot and the floor, okay, not like is being demonstrated in this one, there's actually a fairly large part of this sole here that is not in contact with the walking surface. But if we have a fairly good amount of surface area on that foot, and that cow is just standing there, she's putting approximately 45 pounds per square inch on the sole of her feet, okay, and the hoof wall, if you just calculate that out. Just to put that into perspective here, it's not my hand, it's a little bit too well manicured for that, but if you look at your thumb, if it's about 1/3 of a square inch in surface area, then it would be similar to taking a concrete block and putting that on your finger. I actually went and tried this, and I was going to take some video of it, but it is pretty painful to set a concrete block on your finger, especially then if you start thinking about moving that, dragging that finger around on a concrete surface. You can start to understand why we end up with potentially some problems in those feet. Obviously, those animals are walking. They're lifting 2 feet off of the floor at a time, and so then we double effectively the amount of force on that surface. Again, this presupposes that we have good contact with the sole, between the sole and the walking surface. However, that's not always the case. This is a study that was done in Europe looking at trimming and its effect on weight-bearing area and forces within the claw. This was prior to trimming. I've added the outline of approximately where the claw would be. This was having the cow stand still on a force plate and measuring the force in these feet. Red is where it's a very high force, and blue is then a lighter force. And you can see that we don't have contact with the whole of the sole on the force plate. By trimming, we have improved that a little bit, especially in the left claw here that you'll see, or the lateral claw. We've probably taken away a little bit on the medial claw. But the other thing you'll notice is that the forces or the weight is not distributed evenly across the bottom of that foot. And we have this area right here where we actually have an excessive amount of force, and we're going to focus on that here in a couple of minutes because I believe that's pretty important in what happens mechanically in this foot. So again, we're assuming a flat walking surface and a flat sole. If we now end up with a floor that looks like this, now we can easily double the weight in any specific part of that corium because we have less weight-bearing area. So you can see how these, now we're putting 2 concrete blocks on your thumb instead of just 1. Again, a tremendous amount of force there on a small surface area. All right, well, we can also, with slatted flooring, we're taking away weight-bearing area here, okay? Again, slatted floors can certainly have some positive benefits, but again, we need to remember that we're having a compromise between a flat, level walking surface and when she steps across one of these slats in the slatted floor, she's not going to be able to put weight on there, and that's going to have to be transferred to another part of the foot. This was a herd, large herd, very good cow comfort. They certainly had some lame cows, but this was an interesting one that I was involved in peripherally in investigating this problem. Just to show you the layout of this farm schematically, this was the holding pen and the parlor, and the cows would exit from the parlor, come down the outside here of the holding pen, and then make a left-hand turn to get back to the free stalls. They noticed some extra bruising and some extra problems in the feet, some lame and tender-footed cows, and when they got to investigating it, discovered this. And again, these pictures, I'd like to thank Dan McFarland for sending these to me. I didn't take these myself. But what you'll see here is there's actually aggregate exposed in the concrete, okay, from the concrete. And so what's happening is that the aggregate or the stones that are in the concrete are actually harder than the cement and the concrete mix around there, which was being worn away. There's another picture right here. And again, you can see this is presenting a very uneven surface, and then it's not surprising that they're ending up with this type of scenario where a cow steps on that, you end up with a bruise and damage to that corium on the bottom of the foot. So again, not an extremely usual situation, but one in which they were able to grind down that aggregate and reduce at least some of that trauma to the bottom of that foot. Okay, well, this cow, if she puts her foot straight down, we don't have a lot of friction occurring there. We have the weight on that foot, which is pretty important. But now if that foot starts to slide on the surface, we also have to be concerned about the wearing of that surface because of friction and abrasion that's going on there. And so then it becomes important what we have between these two surfaces, between the foot and the walking surface. That's also very important. The texture of the floor is also very important. So if this cow sets her foot straight down on this floor here, that's going to be traumatic enough because of the uneven nature of the floor. But if she now slides that foot forward at all, you can appreciate how quickly that's going to wear those feet and how traumatic that's going to be to the walking surfaces of those feet. Similarly, what type of sand we have, whether it's a very coarse sand or a very finely textured sand, is also going to affect the amount of wear or abrasion on those feet. So that also needs to be considered. If we have a lot of slurry there, that's going to lead to less abrasion. Again, it might make it a bit more slippery, though, and the cow might have a more difficult time keeping her footing. So a bit of a trade-off there between abrasion and slipperiness. Well, as this cow is putting her foot down on the surface, we have the different structures of the foot that come into contact with the floor. There's the hoof wall, which is in black here, the white line, which is actually in white, and then the sole, which is a gray color. And these don't wear evenly. They're not equally hard. The hoof wall is by far the hardest part of that foot. The white line is the weakest part of the foot. But you'll see that the sole at the back here is really not protected by the hoof wall the way it is at the front. Okay, we have the hoof wall around two sides here at the front and not at the back. So we get excessive wear on the sole at the back here by the heels. That's pretty typically what we see in our herds. And so here's a cross-section through a foot, and again, you'll see we have fairly long toes here, but you can see our heels are worn very thin because they're softer and because they're not protected by that hoof wall the way they are on the front end of that foot. All right, well, another thing that I think is very important and can be very important is this rotational or shear stress that we see as this cow, if she has her weight on this foot and then she rotates, if she rotates that foot, see if we get our animation going here, there we go, you can see we've got a very high rotational shear on this foot. So there's going to be a very high stress on that foot. And that's something I think that we sometimes overlook. This is a herd that I was at just 2 weeks ago, 75 cow herd. They'd had a lot of lame cows over the past year, and really they have for a couple of years now. Really didn't seem to be much of a trend in terms of days in milk. They did think they saw a few more cases in the late summer or early fall. Occasionally in the dry cows, not that commonly. The vast majority of what they were seeing were white line abscesses in zone 3. And I'll show you what those are in just a minute. This is a zone 3 lesion. This is a typical location for a zone 3 lesion right over here. This is just the numbering schematic for that lesion identification. Zone 3 is that back part of the white line at the back end of the hoof wall there. And what it typically looks like, if it's an advanced lesion, you'll see this. You'll see that we actually have that abscess break open at the top of the foot, the coronary band. If you're cleaning this out from the bottom, which is the way to address this, you end up often having to take away a significant part of that hoof wall to get to the infected area. So this was not from this herd, but it would be a similar, very similar lesion to what we found in that herd, were white line lesions there. All right, so very occasionally they did see some toe abscesses, occasionally sole ulcers, although not too many of them at all. Not a lot of digital dermatitis or hairy heel warts or foot rot, things like that. Pretty shallow heels on most of the cows there. They were in free stalls. They were stocked at just under 100%. They had exercise access to exercise paddocks. Good stall usage in the facility when I was there. They didn't have a whole lot of heat stress abatement going on. They could have probably improved that, although for the time that I was there, heat stress was not really an issue anymore. Just have a look at the facility quickly. You'll see here this is the old tie stall facility, which is now being used as a flat milking parlor. They would put 40 of the cows in here at one time and milk them, and then they would let them out and put 35 of the other 30 or 35 cows in there. This was where they had the cows had to walk through to get to and from the milking facility. I've got 3 pictures to show you here. They're in this order: one looking into this facility, one looking down this way to the travel lane, and then one looking here at this little ramp area. And we'll just show you those pictures. So here's looking into the facility. Again, you'll see a pretty tight corner right here. Okay, coming in this way. You'll see that there's grit there, which again I'll show you in a minute. You'll see looking back the other way, I just turned 90 degrees. Again, we've got to step up, and we're making a sharp 90-degree corner this way. So we've got 2 rapid turns there And you'll also notice that they were very careful about making sure there was a lot of grit down, so we had very good traction. Unfortunately, I think that was also one of the problems, that we had such good traction that we had an awful lot of abrasion going on those feet. So let's look at some video from a different herd, but to demonstrate some of these potential problems. What I'd like you to watch in the video is watch the hock here, and then watch the plane really of this foot to see if there's much rotation going on there. So we'll watch this cow come around the corner. She's going to make a 90-degree turn into this pen, and what you have to watch is this point right here on her hock. I guess I can't use my pointer there. If you watch the point on that hock, she really doesn't rotate that foot at all when there's any weight on it. So we can just rewind this here quickly for a second. So just watch carefully on that hock as she comes around this corner. Okay, she's not being rushed at all. And as you watch her plant this foot right here, it doesn't slide at all. That hock really does not turn at all until she lifts the weight off of that foot. So there's really no rotational stresses being placed on that foot at all. All right. So let's go to our next slide. We can get rid of that video. Okay, so again, the point is to watch the hock here. The next video is going to show a different facility. We're going to be looking in the milking parlor at this video, and just watch what's happening with these cows right here. You'll see they're making a 180-degree turn. And I guess I have to rewind that one. Okay, there we go. So watch these cows as they're exiting the parlor here. Watch that foot, and you can see that as she plants it here, she's actually rotating on that foot with that foot in contact and bearing weight on that floor. So right here again, she puts that foot down, and you'll watch that hock. She swings that hock 90 degrees while she has weight on that foot. Now in this facility here, there was actually resilient flooring in the parlor, so it wasn't quite as traumatic as it might have been on those feet. But we'll just rewind this again for a minute. And just again, watch the hocks on these cows. They're rotating their feet while they have weight on that foot. So now it's like you taking your thumb, putting one or two concrete blocks on there, and then spinning your thumb on a concrete surface. So again, a tremendous amount of weight on there, a lot of wearing, and a lot of shear stress on those feet. So again, you can see they're putting it down here. And as she rotates that hock, she has all her weight on that foot right there. All right. This was another facility where we're looking at a cow coming out of a stall, and really two things to notice. On this one, we'll just play it in the interest of time. I'm running out of time here a little bit. If you watch as this cow is coming out of the stall, first thing that she does is, and I cut it off here a little bit, but you can see this cow that was standing right here. As this cow backed out of the stall, the black cow backed out, she actually hip checked this other cow, and you can see down here in the sand there's actually a line, a skid mark from where that cow's foot actually slid in the sand. But then watch this cow, the black cow, as she exits the stall. She's going to back up. She doesn't really have any pressure on her. And you can watch again her hocks, and you'll see as she turns, okay, she's not going to turn that foot while it has any weight on it. Okay, so this hock right here, the close one, she really doesn't start turning that at all until she has weight on the left rear foot. Then she picks this one up, and now she finally starts turning it. So again, the way these cows exit the stall can be extremely important, because as I'm sure you've seen, if you get those cows to exit too rapidly, and we can shut that video, close that video now. If we get those cows to turn too rapidly, okay, and we get people pushing cows who don't know how to do that, they're going to have weight on this foot while they pivot on it, and now we've got a concrete surface with sand on top, and we've got a cow twisting there. She's going to put tremendous strain on the walking surface of that foot and end up with a lot of trauma on that foot. So animal handling and movement becomes extremely important, and I think it's something we overlook too often. So people getting cows out of stalls, we really need to make sure that they know how to do that they don't push those cows, They don't force them to put excessive strains and stresses on that foot as they're doing so. As they're moving down alleyways and around corners, are they pushing those cows so that they're sliding, so that we're getting a lot of abrasion on those feet? Again, if we let those cows go on their own, walk slowly and calmly, we're going to get the minimal amount of abrasion possible. And then causing animals to crowd and shove one another, again, that's going to cause a lot of stresses on that foot. So I really think that that's the primary problem in this facility right here, was that we had animals making very tight corners with a very highly abrasive surface, so a high degree of friction. And then we also, in discussion with the producer, they said that it was not uncommon for the animals to run down this part of the milking facility and down into this doorway here. And there was often a fair bit of shoving and pushing going on with the cows. So I don't think it was an intentional thing, but I think we had a lot of mechanical strain on those feet, and that's what was causing breakdown in the white line area there and causing most of those white line lesions. Obviously, since we did see more problems in the late summer and early fall, there's probably some other compounding effects of some heat stress as well going on. All right, so I think that's okay. Trimming, I only have a couple of minutes left here, but trimming then becomes very important because what we need to try and do is distribute the weight across the bottom of the foot as evenly as we can. As you saw in some of those earlier slides, when we don't have the weight distributed across the bottom of those feet evenly, we have tremendous pressure in a small part of that corium, and that can again affect that corium and cause poor soles and white lines in those cows. So what we need to try and do is to balance up those feet so that we don't have excessively long toes, so that we don't make the heels any thinner than they already are in most of our facilities. And then we want to try and make sure that we check every cow probably twice, ideally twice per lactation, to make sure that she's balanced up. This was actually a cow that ended up with a very thin toe. And for those of you who have trimmed cows, you'll recognize that that's a very thin toe, a very thin sole here up at the toe. Her heel actually is not too bad in this case. But again, excessive abrasion here at the toe on this cow. So we really need to look at those cows ideally twice per lactation. You might not have to trim them very excessively, but in terms of preventing lameness problems, we really need to make sure we keep those feet well trimmed. We'll ignore the treating the lame cows, although it's extremely important. All right, well, who's going to trim the cows? When it comes to trimming lame cows, I think every farm should have at least one person who's able to do that. But for routine trimming, maintenance trimming of cows, I think most herds would benefit from working with a professional hoof trimmer or having somebody on the farm who's able to do that. Again, I think this is a great place for a hoof trimmer to come in on a regular basis and do routine trimming and have the lame cows handled by a trained person on the farm. How are we going to do that? Well, the method I'm suggesting for cows that spend a significant amount of time on concrete, we really want to try and get those feet as flat as possible. Okay, that's why we get the maximum weight-bearing area. We're not going to go into the details of trimming, but we're trying to maximize the weight-bearing area on the bottom of those feet. Now, again, as I said earlier at the beginning of this webinar, that is not going to be true for every single herd in every single location. If you have cows that spend a lot of time out on pasture, it's probably not quite as critical. Cows that are in dry lots, perhaps a different trimming technique might work better for those cows. But if they're spending a lot of time on concrete, we really should try and get those as flat as possible. All right, a couple of quick tips here. In terms of trimming technique, there are a number of resources out there on the web that you can look at. Common problems that I see with trimming is going too far around the side, taking too much of that hoof wall away. That would be similar to wearing away that hoof wall that I showed you in that other herd. Making the heels too shallow is also a very common problem. Like I said, we have a lot of wear on the heels in most cows, and a lot of cows don't need to have very much taken off of the heels, except maybe to balance them up just a little bit. All right, making the toes too short is definitely cause for concern. In this herd here, these toes were being made too short, and we were getting very thin soles. In fact, this picture and the next one are both from the same herd. And in this case, these soles were extremely thin. Okay? The soles being dished out, so we weren't getting any weight bearing in this area. And there was also excessive trimming on the inside of these claws, which is going to potentially expose that corium that's right underneath this area here. So again, we need to make sure we trim those cows properly to prevent lameness and not cause it. All right, well, I'm pretty much out of time. The nutrition, we talked about the last time, how rumen acidosis can be involved in this whole scenario. I don't think it's usually a primary factor, but it's certainly one of the factors that's involved. And my main point here is when I go out onto the farms, certainly the ration that's balanced by the computer is very important, and we have to make sure we get that properly balanced. But there's a lot of things that happen on the farm, the way that feed is delivered, the way it's fed and eaten, that are also extremely important. And so we need to look at how much mixing is going on. Is that feed being overmixed? Are we getting too fine of a mixture there? And are the cows able to sort it? So sorting is another common problem. This is a herd that we were in Pennsylvania, looking at primarily a lameness problem in this facility. So you can watch these cows here and just watch them eating, and you can see even though this ration might look very good on paper, this cow doesn't think that that's the ration that she wants to eat, and you can see she's doing a pretty nice job sorting through there for the stuff that she really wants. So the ration that she's eating is quite different from the ration that you think she's eating, and there's quite a bit of sorting going on by these cows right here, so that they're getting the stuff that they really like rather than the stuff that you want them to eat. So we'll just stop there and go on to the next one. We can assess that by looking at particle size using a particle separator. The Penn State particle separator, there's some good resources there online. And we can do different, shake this out a number of times after feeding to see if those cows are actually sorting that ration. And if we see a lot of variability, a number of hours after feeding, then those cows are able to sort that ration, and we need to evaluate what the problem is with that. So again, just make sure that the ration that's being fed is appropriate, and then make sure that the ration those cows are actually eating is what you think that they're really eating. All right, well, we can't forget about the young stock. The picture on the left here is actually a calf, but the point is that we can certainly get lameness problems in very young animals. These were some heifers in a Pennsylvania herd, and we had some problems with the heifers. Once they freshened, we were getting some lameness pretty quickly in those animals. When I went to look at the heifer rearing area, the heifer facilities, this was the ration that those heifers were getting. Probably a fairly low-cost ration. You can see there's limes and lemons and oranges in here. There was ramen noodles. There were lots of things being fed. I'm not sure we were getting a high-quality ration into these animals that was optimal for foot health. And so I think we need to think very carefully about what these animals are getting and trying to make sure that they're actually getting a healthy, balanced ration that's going to give them good feed, as well as all the other things, of course, that we want them to do. But we need to think carefully, again, about our young stock as well as the mature animals in the dry cows. Okay. Where's our next slide here? Uh-oh. I think I just lost the my connection here. We'll try and get back on. Hope you're still hearing me.
Why don't
Okay.
you go ahead and just sum up, Ernest, if you would.
Yeah, we're I'm back on here. But so heat stress is also very important. We'll just skip through that, but I think it certainly is something that we need to focus on. It is one of the more expensive things you're probably going to do, but we do need to reduce heat stress in the animals as well, because that's often a factor. Again, perhaps not in all parts of North America, but in most parts of North America we have heat stress that we need to deal with. And then obviously this is not the idea of a foot bath, so prevention might involve a foot bath, but not this kind of foot bath. So so we need to make sure we keep those feet clean and dry. All right, well, I'm going to just skip through the end here and basically say that I think when it comes to preventing lameness, it's not the same factor in every herd that's the most important, but I think these are fairly close to the order that we need to evaluate things in. Certainly the cow comfort, I think, is extremely important. And I think we really need to think about animal handling and animal movement in our facilities, especially when we have animals on concrete. The potential for wear on those feet, the potential for stresses and strains on those feet is very real, and I think that's something we sometimes overlook. And then again, don't forget about trimming, proper trimming technique, making sure we have those feet balanced as well as possible, and then the nutrition, heat stress, and hygiene. So I think I'll just leave it at that, Donna, and I don't know if we've had any questions, or if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and take those now.
Thank you very much, Ernest. I couldn't help but chuckle, Ernest, is when you went through all this, I think the take-home message that I got is one that we tell students over and over again. Watch the cows don't lie. They tell what's going on behind the scenes. And really brought that home very well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, again, I've started looking at more carefully over the last little while is really the way those animals are handled as well. I think is something we sometimes don't think about enough is, how are we moving those animals and are we forcing them and rushing them more than we should be.
Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit about hoof trimming, and obviously for farmers, choosing a hoof trimmer is a very important decision. Could you give them 2 items that are important when choosing a hoof trimmer? What would you look for?
Yeah, I guess when choosing a hoof trimmer, I guess one of the things that should not happen routinely is that you have lame cows after your hoof trimmer is there. I mean, everybody makes a mistake once in a while, and you'll get the odd cow that becomes lame, but if you commonly are concerned about cows becoming lame after the hoof trimmer is there, that might be an indicator that that's not, that person is not trimming them appropriately. Now, again, it doesn't mean necessarily that's the hoof trimmer's fault, but at least that's where I would start looking. So that's certainly one thing I would look for. And then, again, depending on what facilities I have, if my cows are spending a lot of time on concrete, I certainly would like to see somebody trimming those feet pretty flat. That we, the Dutch hoof trimming method that we talked about. So again, in a facility where the cows are on concrete a lot of the time, I think that technique is one that should be followed. So.
Mm-hmm. We did have one question in the chat box, Ernest. How did you videotape those cows?
So we just used a high-speed camera. There's actually, it's one you can just get at, I think all of those came from the Canon camera. They have a high-speed taping option on there. We did that, and then I ended up slowing it down in Adobe Premiere even a little bit more to demonstrate those points. But I haven't been able to afford one of the extremely high-speed video cameras yet. But
well, Ernest, we thank you very much for your time and your expertise here. I think there's a lot there that farmers can actually use and agents can use to teach farmers how to prevent lameness, because prevention of problems is very, very important. Thank you very much.